So, I know this is Thingamajigs, the exciting history of mundane things, but I'm kind of bored. I just wish there was some kind of game I could play, like a game for bored people, a board game, like if you will, if I may be so bold as to call it that. What do you think of that?
I don't know. I don't think that's a thing. I think the name board game would not take off. I don't think that it's a good pairing of words together to get someone excited about playing something. I mean, board game.
All right. What if we call it the super awesome, exciting game to make you happy, Antiquary Oxford of 1698?
Well, then that name will still be shorter than one of the board games that I have on my list here.
Hi, I'm Ben.
I'm Danielle. We're going to talk about board games.
Yay.
Or I should say, we're going to talk about the history of board games. We're not going to talk too much about current board games. As the list goes down, you'll start recognizing some names, but for the most part, we're gonna start with ancient, mainly Egyptian.
Until the end, when we are going to go into very thorough, detailed instructions on how to play Nickelodeon's Seen It DVD board game.
You know, I've seen that box, and it looks like so much fun.
I
never played it.
I have played it. We did, in fact, buy a Nickelodeon's Seen It DVD board game. It was pretty cool.
Did you seen all of it? Did you seen it? Did you win the scene? Did you get slimed at the end?
I don't remember if I was actually very good at it at the time, because my primaries were SpongeBob, Fairly Odd Parents, and Jimmy Neutron. Those were the only ones I watched.
Jimmy Neutron was awesome. I wanted to marry Jimmy's dad.
Well, that's really weird.
I thought he was great. I looked at him and said, yes, this is the blueprint.
All right. So what are we talking about again today? TVs or something?
No, we're talking about board games.
Oh. So what about them?
So we've been playing board games since before we had boards to play on. I'm going to go out on a branch here and say the first board game was probably our guy Grug, who was tired of always staring into that fire and decided to draw some lines in the dirt with a stick. So we're going to talk about the oldest board games in no particular order. I will give the dates that I found for them, but I'm not going to list them from oldest to newest because I can't really find out for sure which came first, and I really don't want the grief for messing up the order. So in no particular order, here are the oldest games that I could find.
That being said, you may forward your grief to contact@uselist.us.
But before we do that, I have a little excerpt that I want to mention before we get started. So Dr. Irvin Finkel, an expert on board games and a world-renowned authority on the Sumerian royal game of Ur. You should really look this guy up. He looks exactly like what you just imagined when I said Dr. Irvin Finkel.
He kind of looks like a portrait of Charles Darwin.
He is the epitome of a British curator. In the dictionary where it says British curator, there is a picture of Dr. Irvin Finkel.
And to think I didn't even know British curator was an entry in the dictionary.
It is now. We're going to write our own. Oh, we should write our own dictionary. The Thingamajigs dictionary.
The Thingamajictionary.
Oh, that's good. So he earned his BA in Ancient Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Birmingham in 1972. So that should give you an idea about how old he is. He went on to complete his doctorate there in 1976 with a thesis on, wait for it, ancient Mesopotamian exorcist incantations. That is, I want to read that thesis. That thesis probably slaps.
It's both very specific and wildly intriguing.
He got a doctoral degree with a thesis on exorcistic incantations.
So if you or a loved one is haunted or possessed by an ancient Mesopotamian spirit, you know who to call.
Now, why am I telling you this? Because I want to really drive home that this man is a leading expert, and he makes a very bold statement that I want to add. It really made me feel seen and better about myself. He said, and this is a quote, "The kind of family that buys a new board game and reads the rules together from the inside of the lid and then tries to follow them logically is never attested in the human race. Anybody who does that is really substantially abnormal." And that is the end of the quote. No one really learns games by reading the rules. They learn by watching others and by the family traditions passed down. I always thought I was somewhat dumb for not being able to learn a new game by reading out the rules first, and this man has made me feel a lot better about that.
If we just start playing it without me knowing and understanding every word of the rule book, then I won't be able to yell at you and make fun of you every time you do something that is against the rules. You know how you like to yell at people whenever they make a illegal move in chess? You're robbing me of that joy.
So we're going to start with dice. I know it's not a board game in and of itself, but they are hella old and they are an important integrant of most board games. I found claims of dice being anywhere from 7,000 to 5,000 years old. They are, in fact, the oldest gaming implements known to man. When I say dice, though, I don't necessarily mean the six-sided cubes of today. I'm basically using dice to describe all the small gaming pieces that were thrown in the air, and when landed, you'd read them and they would tell you what to do. They used flat sticks that had painted color on one side. You'd throw these, and then depending on how many color sides versus blank sides faced up would determine your roll. More examples of two-sided dice would be stones or seashells. Again, they would paint or even carve something on either side in order to differentiate. Early multi-sided dice were made of, can you guess? Bone.
Geese. Oh.
Lots of other things too, like clay, ivory, brass, copper, marble. But in this case, they were specifically knuckle bones called astragali.
From whose knuckles?
Like camels, cows.
So they were throwing camel toes.
Now, dice were for more than just games. In fact, I can't even be sure which came first because dice are heavily used in divination. They are so interlocked that the Egyptians, Greeks, Romans all believed that the gods determined how they would land. So it didn't bother them too much that their dice were not shaped perfectly on all sides because it really didn't matter.
Sounds like your standard craps player today.
Yeah, if Ra was feeling gracious, he would make it happen for you, and if he wasn't, then it wasn't gravity or physics' fault. You probably just should have been nicer to the street beggar, and then you would have gotten better dice. It's still thought about a lot in the same, like, even in the Christian circles. I know a girl who has her Instagram bio say something like, "We may throw the dice, but the Lord determines how they land or fall," or whatever.
It's a bit more of an abstract sense, but it's same concept.
Mancala is next on our list of ancient board games. Let's give a brief explanation of the game. I know people still play it today, but just in case there's someone out there that doesn't know what it is, let's save them a Google search, which honestly, that's kind of what this whole podcast is about. So it's played with two people, and the game has holes or divots going up one side of the board and then down the other side. Each end of the board has a larger space that's considered your home. Small pieces of literally anything are distributed throughout the holes on the board. Today it would be like little smooth glass pieces, but in ye olden times they would use pebbles, seeds, beans, really anything small. And each player gets a turn grabbing the little pieces out of one of the holes and then distributing it to all of the other holes. The goal is to get as many in your home hole before the end of the game.
Home hole. If you've ever visited the arcade in Club Penguin, shout out my Club Penguins. They had a Mancala board in there that you could play. It was one of my favorite games in Club Penguin.
So the game's over whenever all the holes are empty and each player counts out their stash and then the most wins. The game is really old.
It's also much more complex than it looks at first glance. Whenever you see it, and you see how it's played, you're like, oh, that's kind of dumb and simple, but there's a lot of strategy involved whenever you play at a high level. You're moving your pieces to affect how the opponent can move their pieces and trying to set them up to steal their pieces. It's vicious game.
So we found what we think is the oldest Mancala board in Ain Ghazal, Jordan, in the floor of a Neolithic dwelling. It was carved out of limestone and had 6 depressions indented in a row on each side. Because of the simple nature of the game, it is extremely difficult to date the game, but it is thought that since the premise of the game is based on like planting seeds, it very well could have appeared at roughly the same time as agriculture, which would make it 12,000 years old. No one's saying that. That's just a hypothesis.
That's just a theory. A game theory. Thanks for watching.
I don't know who that is, but they do not sponsor us.
That was Matthew Patrick.
If anybody does want to sponsor us,
contact at uselist.us.
Next on our tour of old games is Senet. This pops up at about 3000 BC. Senet means passing or gateway in ancient Egyptian. They were very much into faith and the worshiping of their gods. The game is linked to the afterlife and the journey one would take after dying. Later in the game's lifespan, it had religious hieroglyphics on the board. It wasn't like that in the beginning. They kind of added the spiritual aspect after the game was invented. It was a 2-person game consisting of a board with 3 rows of 10 squares. Some of the squares had special symbols. You had 7 pieces like pawns, and you moved them around the board with the ancient dice that we talked about earlier. There is a famous painting of Queen Nefertari playing a game of Senet against an invisible opponent, and it's believed that this detail has significant meaning because, you don't normally play this game alone, but her sitting there with the Senet board playing against nobody is, I think, supposed to signify you're playing against either yourself or you're playing against the afterlife.
Kind of like Doom.
So the painting is on the wall of her tomb. And when I say painting, I mean like the whole wall. It's huge.
Could it be that the person creating this work of art died before they finished the opponent?
No.
I'm going to choose to believe that it signifies the short lifespan of artists.
People were even buried with their Senet games. It was incredibly popular in Egypt, and it was played for 3,000 years.
It's like, bury me with my Game Boy.
Yes. When I die, I want you to bury me with all of the things that we talk about in this podcast. So, I'm going to need a Mountain Dew bottle, and I like chess, so bury me with a Mountain Dew bottle and a chessboard.
And like a half-finished painting.
No. Just the things that I want. I'm the one that's dead.
You're going to make it all about you, I guess.
Well, I'm dead.
All right, well, why do we need it? That's my point.
The funeral is all about me.
Your time is over. You don't matter now.
There is a papyrus that depicts several animals doing human activities, and one of the scenes is a lion playing Senet with a gazelle. And I think it's supposed to be funny because, haha, a lion would never play a game with a gazelle. Look at that lion fighting its instincts and not mauling it to pieces. Well, I watched a video of a guy saying that the story was that the lion won the game of Senet and was able to take the gazelle to Pound Town. He didn't say Pound Town, but I am an adult and I know what to bed means.
The lion got freaky with that gazelle?
Mm-hmm. Made weird little galleons.
Little Lizelle cubs.
Mahin was another popular game that was from around the same time as Senet. It didn't run as long as Senet. It stayed in favor for only about 1,000 years, but it was also a game with religious significance. The game board was of a snake coiled up, and you moved your piece along the scales. It was named after their snake god. It is believed to be a multi-person game, but the rules are sketchy. It's hard to... They like to write things down, but still. Ancient games were found with playing pieces shaped like dogs or hippos, or most commonly lions, and accompanying these pieces were little round balls. It's also believed to be the first spiral game board.
Well, what were the balls for?
We don't know. We don't exactly know how to play it. We just know the pieces that came with the game.
The lion piece has to get to the end and bang the gazelle piece.
Three Men's Morris is the ancient version and objectively better version of our tic-tac-toe, or as the Brits call it, noughts and crosses.
Is that what they call it?
Yeah.
Are you sure they don't call it noughts and crosses in it?
Is this bit ever gonna die? Are we ever gonna get British listeners?
Until a Brit comes on here as a guest star to pronounce all of the British phrases, I'm gonna have to be the only acceptable substitute.
This one is harder to explain. The rules are easy, but the board is a lot of lines. So, like, imagine a square with 4 smaller squares, and then those squares are cut in half on the diagonal.
We're gonna have to put a picture of that.
So each player puts a rock or something to signify their playable piece, and when all the empty spaces are full, you keep moving the pieces along the marked lines until you get 3 in a row, so that you don't get that stalemate like you do in tic-tac-toe.
That sounds complicated. That's probably why we have the tic-tac-toe we have today.
Well, obviously it was not complicated enough, because they pimped it up a bit, and next came 6 Men's Morris. And then that was not enough, so we pumped it up again to 9 Men's Morris. That still was not enough, and we topped out at 12 Men's Morris.
So that'd be you have to get 12 in a row?
I think they wanted more people to be able to play.
I looked it up, and the board for 12 Men's Morris does not look anything like I thought it would. We'll have a picture of it, but there's no middle piece. The whole board isn't the playable area. You can still only get 3 in a row, but there's just a lot more playable space.
Well, unfortunately, they reached too far because it was possible to reach a gridlock, and they had to stop with the Morris madness. The oldest surviving example of this game was carved into a roof tile around 1400 BC. This game survived an incredible amount of time, and it spread far and wide. Versions of this game was played up until 17th century. We still play it today, so it has survived a really long time.
You can download it on your phone.
The Royal Game of which we briefly talked about just for a second whenever we were talking about Dr. Finkel, was quite the popular pastime in 2600 BC. The game was thought to bring forth messages from supernatural entities and predict the player's future. Yet another competitive race game with the goal of reaching the end of the board first. 4 of these boards were found in King Tut's tomb, because you never know when you might need a backup for your backup.
Maybe he was expecting to have company. He wanted to throw a game night.
I don't think that everything that I've read about the afterlife or the journey always seemed to be very dangerous, or they were worried that they needed to have everything. I think it was more of I need to have 4 in case something bad happens.
So he's like, I need to bring a game so I feel better about this terrifying trip I'm about to take, but I need to bring some extras in case a demon eats them.
Or maybe he just had 4 favorites. Maybe he had 4 favorite boards, and so he couldn't choose, and so he decided to bring them all. The Royal Game of kind of had a big head because it was known as the Game of Kings, or the King of Games. I am the King of Games in the Game of Kings.
You could put that to any title, really, if you felt bold enough, you know. You could be like, I am the King of Sandwich Artistry and the Sandwich Artist of Kings.
That would only apply if a king eats your sandwiches.
I mean, who's going to fact check you that?
Backgammon is also very old. Let me paint a picture for you. Let's go back to 1920, where British archaeologists excavated of the Chaldees in the Royal Cemetery. They made a wild discovery. 5 different game layouts that have a slight resemblance to our backgammon boards. We don't know which Sumerian invented it, but we think that they must have been a scientist or someone at least interested in astronomy. The game seems to be based on the solar system phenomena. For example, the pieces are in 2 different colors, so half black, half white, as a symbol for day and night. The sum of the numbers of the dice on both sides was 7. which is the number of days of the week. The sum of the pieces is 30, which is the number of days in the month, and the number of cells on each side is 12, which symbolizes the number of daytime hours and nighttime hours. I don't know. Their calendars were really sketchy. I know that they didn't have 12 months because I would have thought 12 must stand for the months of the year, but I think they only had like 10. I don't know. We're going to cover calendars one day.
I think we just made all this up. I'm trying to find some kind of reason.
We do like to do that. We love to find meaning in nothingness. The Emperor Claudius was so into the game, he had a board built on the back of his chariot.
That does not sound like a very good place to play a board game.
But it is a place that you are often very bored. I'm not really sure how he got all of his pieces to stay still, but he obviously made it work.
He probably just had one of those fancy little magnetic boards.
I don't think he did. Emperor Nero would play some pretty high stakes games, playing for today's equivalent of $15,000 a game. It even rivaled the Circus Maximus as a favorite pastime. Excavators of Pompeii found backgammon boards carved on tables in almost every villa. The game even continued to be played after Christianity took hold because a marble slab was found with a backgammon board. In the center was a carving of a Greek cross with an inscription which roughly translated to, "Our Lord Jesus Christ grants aid and victory to the dicers if they write his name when they roll the dice. Amen."
Amen. Do you write his name as you're rolling the dice? That sounds very difficult.
I find this interesting because the church was emphatically against gambling of all kinds. A priest in 1452 managed to give a 3-hour sermon that was so moving that the population of Nuremberg got together, lit a bonfire, and burned 3,640 backgammon boards, along with 40,000 dice and cards innumerable.
They must have all been really bored after that.
No, but they were holy.
How come holiness always has to be so boring?
Also, I think it's important to mention that the name backgammon only appeared in 1645, so we don't know for sure where the name came from, or maybe they called it something different, but it shows up in records in 1645. Presumably, they called it that before.
It's the whole Book of Fleek problem again.
The 1960s saw a surge in popularity for the game thanks to Russian Prince Alexei Oblensky. He co-founded the International Backgammon Association and wrote his own rulebook.
How very Russian.
I know, right? You're like, I can make this better. He also hosted some tournaments in Manhattan, which attracted a lot of celebrities and royals, which is wild. Then Hugh Hefner started having backgammon parties at the Playboy Mansion, which is equally as wild. Like, what?
It's a very sexy game.
You can even play the game online now.
You can also play Mancala online. And 12 Men's Morris. Technology, man.
I also have a crazy story from the late 70s where a man from Baghdad went into a coffee shop and challenged the best player in town a game, offering a $200 bet. This was a bit steep for the regular players, so they pooled their money together and asked their best guy, One-Eyed Toma, to play the game for them. Unfortunately, he lost and was so upset that he asked for a glass of water and swallowed his dice, saying, "These treasonous dice can never be played with ever again." Now, we cannot confirm whether this story is true, but it was fun to tell. So board games, for the most part, were geared towards adults, but one of the first, I'm not sure you'd consider it a board game for children, was hopscotch in 500 BC. In all that time, the rules for this game never really changed. You throw the marker and jump, skipping the block your markers on.
Yeah, I never really understood hopscotch, but I liked hopping around, so it was fun.
A version of Snakes and Ladders, or Chutes and Ladders, as I played it, is known to go back as far as 200 BC as an Indian children's game. It was meant to teach children about the Hindu concept of karma, morality, and the difference between good and evil. There were more snakes than ladders to demonstrate how making good decisions was harder than making bad ones. Eventually, we took the religion out of it, and it made its way to the Western world. We'll see that be played out. It's almost like games started out having like religious and spiritual aspects, and then they moved more into just morality. And then the games of like today don't really have any kind of...
Well, they burnt all their backgammon boards, so they had to come up with something.
Now let's talk about the game of the goose. It appears in the late 16th century and was made popular by the invention of the printing press, facilitating the widespread black and white printing of the game. It's another race game, meaning you throw your dice and move your pieces through the board. The spaces somewhat symbolized moving through life. All the spaces are numbered 1 through 63. And they also have fun pictures that have meanings. There's a toll bridge where you have to pay the pool and then you proceed to 12. There is an inn where you lose 2 moves. I read in some variations you have to foot the bill, which is an expression we get from this game. The well on 31 means you have to wait for someone to come and help you. So if you're really far up on the game and everybody's behind you, you have to wait a long time for them to come and rescue you. The maze is on 42, and that one sends you back to 39. 52 is prison, and you have to wait to change places with another player. I tried to figure out exactly what change places means. I think it meant you had to wait for somebody to get up next to you, and then they were in prison, and you could move forward.
And if you're the last player to get to prison, you're
Dude, I don't know.
there.
I guess you're just stuck there.
Well, you lost.
58 is straight up death, which means you go back to 1. And then at the end, you have to roll the exact number you need to enter 63. And if you don't roll that, then you go back the amount that you rolled.
On which space do you awaken the gale force winds?
Dude, I had the exact same thought whenever I was reading the rules for this game. I was like, this is gale force winds. Also, there are geese on every 4th and 5th square. And if you land on a goose, your roll is doubled, because geese are good luck, I guess. What is fun about the game of the goose is that they keep the concept of the game, but they changed up the board layouts. So the first game board was just a spiral path with squares and geese, but eventually they upped the goose game and changed the squares to goose eggs. So you had the same path, but all of the spots that you stopped were eggs. But that was not goosey enough, so they changed the whole board into a giant goose, and you moved through the goose's intestines, except the intestines were eggs, and when you won, you plopped out the goose butt where the eggs come out. It's like the rules and the concepts are all the same, except for they're changing up the formatting to be more goosey.
That's fun. We're big fans of geese around here. We should have a goose game.
Ooh, we could have a Thingamajigs goose game. Believe it or not, I am not done talking about bird games. So John Harris of London, England, brings us Swan of Elegance, which is another game where you move along the 31 spaces on the board, but this game came with a pamphlet. Weirdly, it did not come with the spinner or the counter. It was sold separately. It was for families, but mainly children. So each spot had a picture of a child doing something either naughty or nice, and whatever space the child landed on, you would consult the book that came with it, and it would give a lesson about whatever was happening in the picture. But because it's a game where you roll, you move throughout the game, and you consult a book, you could almost say like this is the building blocks for D&D. D&D meaning Dungeons and Dragons. This next game I only added because of its title. It's another morality game published in 1822. Again, it's British. Are you ready for this game's name?
I'm so ready.
Okay. The Delicious Game of the Fruit Basket, containing a literary treat for a party of juveniles and running over with choice subjects for their improvement and diversion in various familiar scenes connected with Old England.
That's the name of it?
That's the whole title.
All of that is the name of it?
Mm-hmm.
It's a really good name.
Do you want to know what the acronym would be for it?
Yes, I do.
I'm going to leave out the these and ofs and stuff like that. DGFBCLTPJRCSIDVFSCOE.
Even as an acronym, that name is too long. If your acronym is 2 sentences long, your name is too long.
We should put up a picture of what the acronym would be and put it in the doc.
Will do.
So I added this next game for the purpose of telling you about the stages of human life you can look forward to.
Oh boy.
So this game is called The New Game of Human Life, published in 1790, which I assure you they do not use the word human to include all humans because everything about this game is for men. It was written by a man and a woman, and I almost wonder if he was like, the new game of men's lives. And she was like, why don't we say human so that girls can play too? And then he was like, fine, but we're still going to make all the pictures about men. The stages of life are around men, and the squares that you move along are, again, all pictures of men. It's another morality game, for example. The assiduous youth, or the benevolent man, allowed players to advance, whereas the drunkard or the negligent boy forced players to lose turns or move backwards.
Seems like he put in the masculine words in there completely optionally. Just like threw a guy word at the end of each thing. Seems pointless, but whatever.
Okay, so like an adjective and then like a male pronoun.
Yeah, that's the whole premise.
So the game was 84 squares long, and that was to split into 7 categories, and each category being like 12 years long. The first being boyhood, which would be 1 to 12. Youth, which was 12 to 24. Manhood, which is 24 to 36. Prime of life, which was 36 to 48. The sedate man, 48 to 60. The old man, which was from 60 to 72. And decrepitude, 72 to 84.
Can't wait till I get to those golden years of decrepitude.
You've just reached manhood.
Hey, go me.
Mm-hmm. I think it's funny that their prime of life is 36 to 48. I don't know how old the guy was whenever he made this game. I'm assuming he was in his prime of life.
Probably started thinking it up when he was... What was the first age?
36 to 48.
So he probably started creating this game when he was 36, and then he published it when he was 48. He was like, yes, this is me. I am in the prime of my life.
The manufacturers warned of the dangers of allowing dice in your home and recommended using a spinner. This game evolved into the game of life that we know today. They dropped all the morality stuff and gave us the option for pink stick figures to drive with. Now let's talk about your favorite game, Monopoly, or as it was originally called, the Landlord's Game. This story is wild. When we think of Monopoly, we kind of think of an almost celebration of unbridled capitalism, but it wasn't supposed to be like that. The Landlord's Game was invented by Elizabeth McGee in 1904. Elizabeth was a feminist and staunchly against capitalism. She gained a lot of her views from the writings of Henry George, specifically his book Progress and Poverty. He believed that the government should collect one tax instead of taxing income and products. They should tax property. Elizabeth was a follower of Georgism, which is what that's called, and wanted to popularize his idea. So she patented a board game that was supposed to educate the public. Her game had 2 sets of rules, one that represented Henry's idea for the land tax, where everyone would benefit, and then the other where people would buy up properties, edge out the unlucky poor people, obviously representing uninhibited capitalism. A winner takes all with the goal of bankrupting the other players. Her goal was to educate people in a fun way, but the problem was that the monopolist version of the game was simply a better game. No one wants to play a game where everyone benefits. They want to play a game and dominate the other players with a crushing victory.
That's what games are all about.
She did sell it, but I think for the most part, it just kind of passed from friend to friend, and people began to do what people do to games, add on things, make house rules. Now, roughly 30 years after Elizabeth invented the Landlord's Game, a man named Charles Darrow, down on his luck, unemployed. This is during the Great Depression, so he's in good company. It was very hard. But that's no excuse for what comes. He's at a dinner party, and he plays the game with, I'm assuming, our friends, at the very least, acquaintances, because why else would he be eating and playing games with these people? So after playing the game, he created his own version and patented it in 1935. Obviously, the patent clerk either didn't check or didn't care that it was virtually the same game, but whatever. And he sold the rights to the Parker brothers. One journalist after another would ask him where he got the brilliant idea from, and his response was, and this is a quote, "It's a freak, entirely unexpected and illogical." Anytime someone gives you the, "I don't know, it just came to me," or worse yet, "It came to me in a dream," I feel like that is the first red flag for "I stole it." The company then approached Elizabeth about her game, obviously wanting to buy it so they wouldn't have any competition, and she sold it for a measly $500 under the condition that they continued to publish it and would not change anything about her game. In January of 1936, the Washington Star interviewed Elizabeth to ask her how she felt about only getting $500 for her patent and no royalties ever. She said it was all right with her if she never made a dime as long as the Henry George single tax idea was spread to the people of the country. The Parker brothers did publish the game, but they did nothing to promote it, and the game was almost immediately recalled from stores, and almost every unsold copy was destroyed. On top of that, the game did have 2 sets of rules, but only the rules copyrighted by the Parker brothers was sold with the game. Purchasers were required to contact Elizabeth McGee Phillips, because she got married, so she has a new name, to obtain the second set of rules. Darrow, on the other hand, became a millionaire and received royalties throughout his life.
The system works again.
Now, why do we even really know about this story? The Parker brothers, along with Charles Darrow, certainly tried to write her out of the history of Monopoly. Well, in 1973, a man named Ralph Anspach, he was German.
Really?
Yeah. An economist professor at San Francisco State University, another person staunchly against monopolies. He played a game of Monopoly with his son, and that got him thinking, so he started looking for an anti-monopoly game, and there wasn't one. So he took it upon himself to make one. He literally named it Anti-Monopoly.
Clever.
And boy, was it a smash hit in the Bay Area, almost an icon. It was meant to retain all of the fun of Monopoly, but make it very clear that the monopolists were the bad guys. Instead of building Monopoly, you tried to take them down. All of this success came to a halt when our boy Ralph received a cease and desist letter from the attorneys representing General Mills, which owned the Parker brothers. Not only that, but they wanted him to put an ad in the newspaper, an apology ad. Ralph, literally being an anti-monopolist and literally selling a game that makes that clear, he got ready to fight. He gets ahead of it and he sues them first, something about wanting to keep the lawsuit in California. So he started digging into Monopoly's past, and that's why we know the story today. He did win his case to continue marketing anti-monopoly, and he wrote a book called The $1 Billion Monopoly Swindle, where he talks about his experience with the lawsuit.
Good work.
So that's all I have for board games. There are a lot more that we can cover if we want to do a 2-parter to board games. There's Pachisi, Dominoes, Chess, Checkers, Cluedo, Risk, Dungeons and Dragons, Magic the Gathering, Catan. There's a ton more that we could cover, but it was just so long already.
I like Farkle. Where are my Farkle files at?
Farkle files. I've never even heard of this game. What is Farkle?
So it's kind of like poker, where there are different hands of dice that are worth different values, and you want to roll the dice and set aside the dice that you think will make the best hand, and then roll again with the remaining dice until you have the best hand or until you run out of dice to roll. It's pretty fun. Google it. But at any rate, well, this has been one exciting history of a mundane thing. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to grab a goose and go to jail. Go directly to jail. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200.
Nah, go!